if I told you that Chris Brazel was a secret weapon for Tennessee, or that, oh, I could keep going here. I could even go Peyton Lewis is a secret weapon for Tennessee, or I could go Mike Matthews, a secret offensive weapon for Tennessee. I would be way off base because according to Pro Football Focus, there is another young man who has established himself and will be one of the top players at his position this fall. Tell me about Miles.
Yes. Miles Kitselman is the one player not named Nico Iamaleava who is a top 10 PFF player returning in college football at his position. Just for context, Nico Iamaleava is 9th nationally among quarterbacks, PFF quarterbacks this year. That's only 5th in the SEC, though, behind Diego Pavia, DJ Lagway, Arch Manning, and Garrett Nussmeier. But Miles Kitselman at tight end is actually 2nd in the SEC and number 7 among tight ends returning this year, according to PFF. The only guy ahead of him in the SEC is Eli Stowers at Vanderbilt, who's number 1. But yes, Miles Kitselman, according to PFF, and here's their quote, was following a year at the JUCO level and 2 seasons at Alabama as a backup, Kitselman broke out his senior year after transferring to Tennessee. He finished 2024 as the 7th most valuable tight end in the nation, according to PFF's wins above average metric, and ranks 4th among returners at the position. Kitselman was also one of 4 tight ends in college football with top 25 PFF grades as a receiver and a run blocker. He hasn't dropped a pass in his college career.
Well, he only caught like 10 at Alabama, in all fairness, or maybe
True, but that's still pretty impressive to not have a drop for his career, because he did get a lot more involved last year in the offense, and he kind of emerged. And at 250, and we forget this, and they bring this up, at 6'5", 256, he's uniquely big for a tight end and a unique advantage for them.
No, okay, so let me ask you this: if Miles Kitselman is the secret weapon, instead of on the message board, we've got Boo Carter. We've got one person asked, will they dip into the spring portal? I don't think so. But if Miles Kitselman is the secret weapon and the go-to player, did Tennessee have a good season?
I'm going to say yes. Whenever your tight end is a secret weapon, that's usually a recipe for success.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, Mike Matthews and Brazel are going to beat him in a 40-yard dash, right? Probably more talented athletes. But that doesn't mean that in any shape, form, or fashion that he can't be a focal point of the offense. And I think that's just fine.
Oh, exactly. And for context, when Josh Heupel was offensive coordinator at Missouri in 2017, Albert Okwuegbunam, I think I pronounced his name right. He was an All-American tight end there. He, in Josh Heupel's last year at Missouri, led the team in touchdown receptions with 11, which is how Missouri shocked everybody, went to a bowl game that year, which is what got Josh Heupel the head coaching job at UCF. So Heupel, if he has the right tight end, is not scared to make him his go-to playmaker. And Okwuegbunam was 6'5", 258 pounds, very similar to Kitselman's size. 6'5", 256 pounds. So that's like the type of tight ends Josh Heupel loves. And we know this with Jacob Warren, by the way, too, with the way he uses him. Josh Heupel loves big tight ends in the red zone. I mean, loves them as receiving targets in the red zone. And I thought one of the first year he got to Tennessee, Princeton Fant was the guy to catch passes between the 20s. And then once they got into the 20, they would put Jacob Warren in. Then after that, they started alternating drives.
Here's my concern if I'm Miles Kitselman. And I think he's very good. Don't get me wrong. I think Ethan Davis, though, may be a transcendental sort of talent at tight end. And if that's the case, what did Tennessee do with Princeton Fant and Jacob Warren in their senior years? They leaned more on Fant, right? He did special things out of the backfield. He was your goal line guy. They clearly, when the ball was going to be in the air to a tight end, if they could work it out, it was going to go to Princeton Fant. No offense to Jacob Warren, but I think you're just talking about a slightly better athlete. So, Caleb, I would say this. If Miles Kitselman at the end of the season is Tennessee's star surprise player, whatever you want to call it, I think they got troubles for one of two reasons. And that's that Chris Brazel, Mike Matthews didn't step up, or they didn't have a running back step up, or the second tight end, Ethan Davis, who may be the first tight end by the time preseason camp rolls around, did not step up. So that would be my biggest concern. David says using 12 personnel to flex Miles or Ethan Davis in the red zone could be deadly this year. Totally agree.
What if it's this? And let me ask you this question, Dave, because I think this is a very strong possibility. Ethan Davis has more receiving yards than Miles Kitselman, but Miles Kitselman leads the team in receiving touchdowns.
I could see that.
Because they get inside the 20, you know, like I feel like once they get inside the 20, they're going to want to just throw it up to Miles Kitselman, right? Who can guard him in the red zone?
I could definitely see that. But ultimately, who do you want to be Tennessee's standout player? Caleb, I'll ask you that. So again, I'll argue that if it's Miles Kitselman, the season didn't go exactly as planned. Hang tight. 30 seconds from Double D Piping.
Double D Piping provides full-service fire protection on any scale. From residential homes to government facilities, we can assist any customer through design, fabrication, installation, inspection, and demonstration of fire suppression systems. With 30 years of service across 5 states and a full staff with over 40 years experience, our quality can't be beaten. Don't get caught watching what you could have prevented. Call Double D Piping.
So I want to reset the poll question. What is it right now, Caleb? I got enough feedback on that.
All right, what is Tennessee's Achilles heel? And I'll go ahead and give the results. 38% say lack of depth, 23% say interior offensive line, 31% say no proven skill players, and 8% say linebackers.
Okay, I got a thought for you if you want to go in this direction.
Okay.
Who will be Tennessee's star player on offense? And don't include Nico because everybody's going to vote Nico. But let's go Miles. Let's go Mike Matthews, Chris Brazel, and then a running back to be named later, which we believe is going to be Peyton Lewis, but nobody's completely sure at this point. I'll be interested to see where that shows up. Again, give us your vote and your thoughts on the chat board. We greatly appreciate that. Everybody's high on Deshaun Brom. I am too, but I think Ethan Davis has that second position build. I really believe he's elitely talented. I mean, not just good, but really good. Now, Dylan says, my main issue with Ethan Davis is his injury history, and sometimes he's afraid of contact because of his injuries. Very fair. Very fair. Because he is a former basketball player type. Think of Antonio Gates. And yes, I think that is going to be a concern for all those basketball types. I can remember covering a defensive tackle out of the Washington area, Eddie Goldman, and there was concerns about his toughness. He was a basketball guy, preferred basketball, but he happened to be 6'5", 320 pounds. So he was definitely going to play football. Caleb David says, I want Mike Matthews with 50 to 60 catches for 1,100 yards, 12 TDs ideally, but 3 guys with 500 yards, 5 TDs work.
All right, can I give you my ideal stat line for Tennessee this year? If you're a Tennessee fan. Mike Matthews has 1,100 yards receiving. Chris Brazel and I'll say Braylon Staley as a slot guy each have about 600 yards receiving. Ethan Davis has 400 yards receiving. Miles Kitselman has 250 yards receiving, but 12 touchdowns. Basically, all his catches are touchdowns.
Yeah, I could go with that. We're not even talking about the running back position. I mean, if Tennessee gets 1,000 yards out of Peyton Lewis, how big is that for this offense?
Oh, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. But I mean, it might be by committee for them to get the running backs to 1,200 yards. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm pulling up, if everybody wants to return to the 2022 offense, just for context, Jalen Wright had 875 yards. Jabari Small had 734 yards. Now, part of that was Hendon Hooker was a part of the running game. I think more than Nico Iamaleava was going to be because Hendon Hooker ran for 430 yards. They used him on a lot of those plays. But then when it came to receiving, Jalen Hyatt had 1,200 yards. Brew McCoy had 600 yards. And Rel Keaton had over 500 yards. And so, yeah, I think that's my ideal number. But of course, Jalen Hyatt also had 15 touchdowns.
Yeah, and with Jabari and Jalen, I mean, they split it pretty even. It was probably about 60-40. So I wouldn't expect a guy to have over 1,000 yards in that scenario.
No, I wouldn't either.
This year, they might be stuck with Peyton Lewis being their primary guy. No offense to Deshaun Bishop, and we're going to preview the running backs here in just a moment, but I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. What's our poll question again, Caleb?
Yeah, so who will be Tennessee's star skill player on offense? Miles Kitselman, Mike Matthews, Chris Brazzell, or a running back to be named later?
I think it's a running back to be named later. What do you say?
I think it's Mike Matthews. They went all. I mean, Mike Matthews was their Nico for the next class, and I think this was the year that duo is supposed to take off. If it doesn't take off, then you got to start asking questions of Josh Heupel, because it's kind of like, remember how Dabo built Clemson when he got Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins together?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what this is. It's Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans, isn't it? Where you got like a
Those are pretty good dudes. I think Johnny Manziel is like the best playmaker I've ever seen, and Mike Evans is one of the best receivers I've ever seen.
But I mean, Josh Heupel went for Nico and Mike Matthews to create that type of duo, didn't he? That was the goal.
Yes, and go ahead, finish your point, and I want to get to General Ursus's point.
Yeah, so I just think that that's all I was saying, is that I think that like those are the expectations you kind of want if you're Tennessee at this point. But yeah, I'll go Taj Boyd, Sammy Watkins more than Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans. I get it. Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans is like, that's the gold standard of quarterback receiver.
General Ursus said, I think Mike Matthews needs to be the breakout star player. He was highly recruited and was a 5-star. Well, you do lose a little recruiting panache if he's not, because you've had 2 5-star players in Nico and Mike Matthews and we'll see what David Sanders does, another 5-star. But if you haven't proven to high school prospects that you can get them involved early, right now, I think that's a big issue with Tennessee, then it's going to start to hurt you in recruiting at some point. And it may have already.
Yeah, it's going to start becoming a big deal. And I mean, if Mike Matthews and Nico are not a deadly duo next year, and if David Sanders Jr. is not seeing the field as a true freshman, given how highly touted he was as a tackle, you're going to start seeing a lot of questions going in.
We definitely have the best listeners in the biz. David says Chris Brazzell should be the guy if you go by Heupel's recent history. Older guy in his second year in the system. Injuries aside, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, but you see Mike Matthews and you see Chris Brazzell. Doesn't Chris Brazzell strike you as more of a Ramel Keaton type?
You know, Chris Brazzell strikes me as a big dude that's hard, it's impossible to cover, that can get open downfield and win jump balls. So to me, Mike Matthews, to your point, is the better overall polished receiver. But man, I'm not selling Chris Brazzell short. I think if he's your street guy, so to speak, I think you'll be just fine.
All right. Well,
streak is in playing naked, but
I get what you're saying.
Okay. Sports Treasures, carrying over 5 million sports treasures and so much more. Follow on Facebook for the best sports memorabilia, daily updates. Go to facebook.com and Sports Treasures TN against Sports Treasures TN. Now, plot twist by our guy Dylan. What if it's Boo Carter?
I mean, I still think that's possible. I think that's what Boo Carter wants. I think that's why there was this idea that he was flirting with the transfer portal in the offseason. He wanted to get more roles on offense.
If it is Boo Carter, if he amasses over 250, 300 yards from scrimmage, Tennessee's offense has had a really, really good season. If they're able to dole out some touches to him, that to me is pretty impressive.
What if Boo Carter's in New York at the end of the year?
Wouldn't completely rule that out, but it seems like a bit of a reach. Obviously, you're making the comparisons with Travis Hunter, Colorado. There seems to be that love affair right now. Timothy had this to say, Caleb, he's super chatting you so that money goes to Quincy Calhoun's college fund. So what do you have to say there?
Wahaha, Caleb, LOL, you were such a negative Vol. Yesterday it was ugly win. Now it's Heupel's fault for players not doing what they are getting paid for. All good, though. Well, Timothy, I'm not a Vol. I cover the Vols, but also I appreciate the super chat. I really do. I love you, Timothy. But I also have to point out that I'm the one putting the expectations on Nico and Mike Matthews to live up to what Nico and Mike Matthews were recruited to do. So I don't know if that's being negative on them. I think I'm putting the expectations on them to live. I'm the one who just invoked Johnny Manziel, Mike Evans.
Right. And for all the discussion we had about other skill players, if it's not ultimately Nico is the superstar, if he's not winning a couple of SEC Player of the Weeks and perhaps in the running for SEC Player of the Year, this season has gone awry.
If we're not talking about him going to New York in November, the season's gone really awry. I'm not saying he has to go to New York, although I think he should have to go to New York. But like in November, we should at least be in the conversation of like Hendon Hooker 2 years ago, right? Like what he's got to do to get to New York.
I got no problem with that.